Intway. Maria Termina.
Hello everyone, I'm Maria Heller.
And I'm Juana Heller.
And we own a tiny business making gothic and fantasy clothing for women. In today's video, we're going to talk about something else though. If you're a subscriber, you know we usually make content about designing and sewing, but this is gonna be the first video in a long series about something else entirely, about house hunting in the Transylvanian countryside. But first, some background. We started this business in 2016 and we work from home without any other employees. We've been best friends and a couple since high school, around 2010, and both of us come from Romanian working class families. And growing up, neither of our home situations were ideal. So when we started being together, our biggest dream was to one day have our own house, a home, a safe home, because we didn't really have that growing up.
So we kept our relationship hidden from pretty much everyone in our lives except a couple of friends. And as soon as we became a couple, we started saving up together. We were both pretty desperate to have a living situation that was safe and secure in a country that is very homophobic. So this dream of ours, of having a house of our own, was not just a casual wish, it's an urgent, non-negotiable necessity.
For some context, in that time the minimum wage in our country was around 700 lei a month, which is around 150 euros a month, and that was pretty much what everyone in both our families were earning. Another thing to mention is that both Juana and I lived in our grandparents' houses. In our grandparents' generation, it was very normal for them to build their own houses for their families and for the kids to stay and continue living at home with them even after marriage and having children. So when Juana and I met, I was living in my grandparents' house and my only source of income was the orphan's pension I received, which was around 350 lei a month, which is 70 euros a month. So that was all I had to buy toiletries, school supplies and everything else I might need.
As opposed to Maria, I didn't even live in the same city. I took the coach to school from another town. After school, I worked as a mail carrier, delivering invoices in my neighborhood, and I earned 100 lei a month or 20 euro, which was all I had to spend on school supplies.
I made this drawing back in 2010 or 2011, we don't know for sure. It shows our dream life, which is a secluded house next to a forest, big garden, chicken,
big fluffy dog.
Yeah. So here is where we were in high school, where we met. Both of us dreaming of owning a house one day, neither of us having a very healthy relationship with money, and our biggest fear was to ever be in debt. Many things happened in the decade between our 20s and our 30s, and I'm not gonna go through them because this is not the video and not the place, but there are a few things that I want to mention. So when I was 23, I was still living in my grandparents' house with my grandma and my aunt, and my aunt kicked me out for being gay, though she had no right to do so because I had a right to live there as inheritance from my father who deceased when I was a child. Anyway, because of that, Juana and I decided to renovate a previously unoccupied room in her grandparents' house and live there together with her parents and sister, although while keeping our relationship secret from them because homophobia. And that's where we lived ever since. Another important thing to mention is our writing. Both of us were writing since we first met and continued to write. And when we had this dream of owning a house in a secluded place away from the city, we imagined that we'd be able to do that because we will earn a living from writing.
So from the beginning, Maria and I had this very clear goal, this very clear image of how our life is going to look like, and writing was a part of it. We thought we can simply write and earn a living while doing this, therefore we can live in the countryside, not worrying about what are we going to work. Anyway, Maria and I were writing since the beginning of high school, each working on our own individual novels. We self-published both of them. I published mine just before graduating from university in 2014, and Maria published hers 1 year later, after having worked on them for 6 to 7 years at that point. The publishing was a complete and utter failure, and the novels didn't sell. This sent both of us into suicidal spirals and depressions that lasted years. We always dreamt that we're going to be writers. and we're going to make a living out of writing. So this failure saw the death of that dream. Objectively speaking, the problem wasn't with our books, with the quality of our writing. I think the books were good. They just never found the public, and looking back, it was foolish to think we'd be able to make money from writing in Romanian. Even the best known writers here have other jobs. They don't live off the books they write.
Okay, so the publishing was another failure, and to distract myself from the pain, I decided to do something else entirely, do something new, something I didn't try before, something that is not tainted by huge expectations and disappointment and pain, so like a blank page. So I decided to start sewing, and I just taught myself how to sew from scratch. From never having sewn a single button in my life, I learned how to sew, how to make patterns, how to draft, how to design. And in the beginning, it was just for fun. But the second dress I ever made in my life is this dress, and to this day is still one of my most popular designs.
Meanwhile, I was working part-time in an LGBT club, earning just enough so we could pay bills and buy some food. From the one room in which we lived in my grandparents' house, using some fabric scraps, Maria started this business, sewing by hand, not even owning a sewing machine.
So I learned pretty fast, and I opened an Etsy shop in 2016. I only got around 5 orders in the first year, while still battling the depression and everything caused by the publishing debacle. But fast forward to 2018, and we managed to make our business grow. Though we still only used our one bedroom, the single room we had in one of the grandparents' house, with no atelier, no separate sewing room.
We basically worked from bed.
Yeah, but we managed to start a business like that from nothing.
In 2018, we decided to take our business further, and we applied for European funding for small businesses. We spent a year writing a project, going to classes and making all the necessary paperwork and intricate business plans they required for the funding, all which took months and months to prepare. Just before Christmas in 2018, we found out that we won the competition. We won the funding, 40,000 euros non-refundable funds. But before we accepted them, my parents decided to backstab us and decided not to let us renovate their unused garage and turn it into our atelier as they previously promised countless times. Our entire project hinged on the fact that we have an actual space in which to run our business. That's how we made our plan. And my parents knew exactly what they were doing when they refused to sign the permission for us to use their space. So because my parents suddenly changed their mind, we lost 40,000 euros.
So losing the funding was another blow that threw us into another spiral of depression. So at the beginning of 2019, very hurt and depressed, we decided to start looking for another place to live, to finally find that house we always wanted in the countryside. We also both enrolled in driving school.
It wasn't that we managed to gather a lot of money by that time, just that in 2019, properties were still cheap in the countryside. You might think that once you have the money, finding the house is the easy part. Well, not if you want a house in the Romanian countryside. Apparently, you can't throw money at a real estate agent or an agency and expect them to find a house for you. Therefore, we had to find properties ourselves.
But we didn't really know where to start, so we joined a lot of Facebook groups dedicated to moving to the countryside, and that's where people posted advertisements of selling houses or looking for houses, so that's what we started with. And this is where we found this guy that was basically acting as a mediator, finding people who want to sell houses and finding people who want to buy houses in the countryside and putting them together for a fee, obviously. So what he was doing was kind of under the table. It wasn't really legal. He didn't have a business for this, but he was filling a gap in the market because real estate agencies don't really take such, especially very old, cheap, secluded houses in the countryside to sell them because it's not worth it for them. Having to take people for viewings takes a lot of time and a lot of gas, and the houses there are very cheap, so the percentage they make from the sale is very small and therefore not worth it. So anyway, we found this guy who was doing basically all of this under the table. We told him what we were looking for, kind of our budget. So we took a day, we found a day, and I asked my mom and her boyfriend to help us, and they drove us to another county to meet up with this guy to show us some properties. And it was basically a full day of just following the guy around in the car, in two separate cars, while he showed us like 4 or 5 properties. All this was happening in the beginning of 2019.
Yeah. The absolute first property we saw looked pretty promising. It had an old house that was salvageable. There was a little river flowing just in front of the house, which we really liked. Behind the house was a forest, but there were downsides, such as there were neighbors very close, both on the left side and the right side of the house. The property wasn't as big as it was advertised. It wasn't a big chunk of a property. It was around the house a little bit and then scattered around the village, some more of it.
So in bits, the property was in little bits. This is common in countryside in Romania. You don't have like one big yard, but a small yard and then some more land here and some more land there.
Yeah. And another one of the properties we saw with this guy had a sheep farm as a neighbor. And we could barely hear each other talk over the barking of shepherd dogs. So that property was an instant no. It didn't even matter how the house looked. Another house we saw was very, very remote. There was no access road, only a dirt road. You had to have a tractor to get to the house. Therefore, any kind of renovation would be nearly impossible. That was also a no. We don't have photos of all the properties.
No, we don't have photos of anything actually from this section.
No?
No. So I'm remembering this very, very vaguely, like it's a movie I saw years ago. And this entire segment with the houses we saw in the first half of 2019 was actually added later in the script because we completely forgot about it and only later remembered that, oh yeah, we visited some houses in 2019 as well. Anyway. So the only property we actually liked from this bunch was the first one. So we called them and we met up with the owners in a coffee shop in Cluj, and we talked to them, and we found out there's another downside, which is the fact that they didn't have the paperwork up to date or even started. We didn't really know at the time, but that is actually a major downside because it can take years to take such an old property and make all the paperwork necessary to actually legally sell it.
The last property we saw in 2019 was one we found ourselves in the newspaper. My sister drove us to see it because at the time Maria and I didn't drive. This house was in the rural area of Alba Iulia. It was March, I think. So this property had a small cabin which was surrounded by just enough land. There was a forest nearby. Yeah, it looked nice. It was in our budget. For a while we thought we were gonna get that one.
Yeah. We went to see it like 2 or 3 times, I don't remember. I took my mom to see it as well.
And we were pretty determined to buy that property. We invited the owner in a lawyer's office in Cluj because something about him just seemed fishy. He was very eager to sell. Very impatient to sell. So we asked him to come to this lawyer's office. The lawyer reviewed his paperwork, and of course many things were not proper. First off, the cabin was built illegally. It didn't have a building permit, and then his actual property was much smaller than what he showed us because he actually fenced a part of public pasture that was owned by the city hall and said it's his. So all sorts of shady things.
And there was another part which he bought illegally from a neighbor without paperwork, and he was offering to sell us that part as well, but he couldn't because he didn't buy it legally. So yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah.
And somehow it took this blow with this last house we found to finally make everything sink in. Losing the business funding, the fact that we couldn't find a property in our budget to match all our needs and specifications.
The helplessness of not being able to drive ourselves to see properties.
Yeah, and the backstabbing of losing the business funding, and it all finally all came crashing down, and we sunk into a deep depression, and we didn't have the motivation to do anything anymore. We didn't have the motivation to finish our driving school or to keep looking for properties. We stopped looking for properties altogether.
Yeah, that part, that 2019 was the bleakest.
So we basically stayed in that depression until 2021, and we did nothing but work, not focusing on anything else, not thinking on about anything else that was out of our control. So the way we kind of dealt with it was to
We
just
treated our work as a life raft.
like bury your head in the ground and just do these few things that are in your control, which was our work,
which you can do perfectly.
yeah. So just sewing, making new items, selling as much as we can, and basically saving up so that we can increase our budget.
We didn't really have a plan, we just worked.
So we found escapism through work. Well, it was kind of unhealthy at that point, we weren't doing anything else.
We saved up a lot during that time, so yay, I guess.
Yeah, that's the one plus. So it took us overworking ourselves for a decade, not going out, not having friends, not eating out, not spending, not taking a single vacation for an entire decade, working for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, not taking time off, all the while struggling to run a business from our bedroom and living in a not so nice living situation with one as parents after they backstabbed us about the business funding and keeping our relationship secret from them. Yeah, it was a lot of
putting your head in the sand
and a pretty toxic environment.
Yeah. So I'm not presenting our lifestyle as inspirational or even healthy. We definitely don't. We are not presenting our lifestyle as inspirational or even healthy. We definitely don't have a healthy kind of relationship with money. Just that instead of doing impulsive shopping or spending, we save. We save and we hoard, and that's what we know how to do.
Yeah, some people who come from low income families, when they finally start having a bit more money, they finally buy all the things that they couldn't afford to before, and that's one like extreme or coping thing. But somehow we've fallen into the exact opposite of that, which is that we never spend, we like save up
ridiculous
to an
amounts.
extreme, and just just save up.
We realized it's a problem when we actually had savings to change our living situation. For example, we were both sharing one sewing machine and working on commissions and taking turns when we could realistically afford two. And then we sat down, had a conversation, and we're like, okay, let's buy the second sewing machine.
Yeah,
What the hell?
at least when it comes to business, we can see things a bit more reasonably and say that, okay, this is a business investment, it's not just splurging. So it took us a decade of not so healthily dealing with money to finally save up for this one dream, which was to buy an old house in the countryside in cash with no loan, with no debt. So in 2021, we decided to try again. We decided that we want to get a bit better mentally and to finally start looking for houses for sale in the countryside again. So in preparation for that, we started going to therapy. And we went to therapy for about half a year before gathering up the courage and the mental energy and resilience to start actually looking for properties for sale.
Backstory over. Now we're finally getting into the house hunting. So in summer of 2021, I finally got my driver's license, and almost immediately we started looking for houses for sale online. It was like the second week we were already going to see houses. I learned how to drive on steep mountain roads, basically.
Yeah. So we began with a pretty systematical approach based on two factors. One, we wanted the house to be in the mountain region, and we wanted the house to be, or the property to be nearby a river. So what we did is we bought a map of the Apuseni mountains, and we followed all the little rivers, and we searched on Google the names of all the villages alongside these rivers. And then we took the names of those villages and we went on several websites where people list houses for sale, trying to find houses for sale in these specific villages that we knew were in the mountainside, in the mountains and nearby a river.
The first impediment and the most shocking to me and to Maria was that no one seemed to be able to make proper listings.
Yeah, they had like 3 blurry photos and like a few lines that were very, very open-ended, like nice areas, quiet and big yard, without mentioning the actual size of the yard, the actual size of the house. We actually found a few who didn't even mention which village the house is located in.
Just pretty house in the countryside.
And you had to call and ask all these questions. And it doesn't make sense to me. Why would you answer these questions on the phone again and again and again for each caller?
Each prospective buyer.
Instead of just putting all this info down in writing in the description so that people who aren't interested in those things don't call you anyway. Yeah.
This was a problem. This was a big problem. I actually talked about it in therapy. This was a hurdle. I thought we're never gonna buy a house because these people cannot write
so
information.
Incompetent, like cannot even put the relevant information in a listing. Basically, we made a list of questions to ask. I made the list of questions to ask, and I found all the properties and like saved all the links in a document. And Juana made all the phone calls because if my life depended on it, I wouldn't make a phone call. And the second impediment was that in Romania, in the countryside, people don't really have up-to-date paperwork for their inheritances and properties. Up-to-date means that, grandma died, years ago, maybe a decade ago or more, and no one bothered to make the succession and update the paperwork so that the people who are alive now are the owners on paper of that property. If you have a house in this state and you're trying to sell it, it's going to take months or maybe even years to make all the paperwork up to date.
And all the people that are inheritors of grandma's house, they must all agree they want to sell it.
And people are not aware of this. They don't make the paperwork because it costs money to go to the notary and get all this paperwork done. But they imagine that if they find a buyer and they're gonna receive a down payment, they're gonna use that money to make the paperwork, and it's gonna take a month and they're gonna be done. They don't imagine that it takes more than a year, and that many possible buyers are gonna be put off by this.
So we selected over 50 listings and I called around 20 and we ended up visiting 5 until we found one.
So initially we planned to buy just land and build on it from scratch, build our own house. But we kept reading on bureaucracy and laws and things, and it was kind of unclear the process you have to go through to get a building permit on a piece of land that was previously pasture or something else. So because everything was so complicated and so bureaucratic and we couldn't get a straight answer one way or another, we decided to just find an old house already existing and either tear it down and rebuild or renovate and extend it, because like that we were certain that on that piece of land where the house is standing, it is legal to build because a house was already legally built there. So it was a guarantee that we would receive permission to renovate and expand it.
Another very important criteria was we wanted no neighbors nearby. We wanted for the property to be near a forest or a river.
Or both.
Or both, yes. In the mountain region and secluded. In terms of utilities, we wanted nothing but electricity from the grid. Even before the war in Ukraine started, we wanted nothing to do with gas. And that's not a problem because many villages in the mountains don't have gas anyway. About our budget was flexible. When we were looking for just an empty plot of land, our budget was 10,000 euro.
And if you were to buy an old house, our budget was completely dependent on the condition of the house, whether we can renovate it and save it, or if we had to tear it down and build from scratch. So we ended up going over budget anyway because the price of properties skyrocketed during the pandemic, and we wanted to have some money left for renovations and expansion and building, and we ended up having to dig into that part of the savings that we were trying to keep for renovations. So our budget was 10,000 euros for an empty plot of land and 20,000 euros for a plot of land with a salvageable house.
Workable house.
Yeah, on it that could be renovated. And we ended up paying 26,000 euros for the house we bought in the end.
Yeah, we really struggled to find what we're looking for under 30 or 35,000 euros. Hello everyone, this is Juana. Maria just finished editing this first video and she realized it's very long. So we decided we're going to split it in two. Initially, the plan was to make this first introductory video as a get to know us with a bit of background, also with the house hunting, with how we saved up, and including the visiting of the few properties that we saw in 2021 with pluses and minuses, photos and video and stuff like that. But if we do include everything we initially wanted, the video is going to be an hour long. Therefore, we're going to pause here, and all that is going to go into the next video, which is going to be posted a week after this one. Hopefully the next videos are going to be much more interesting. We're going to take you on our property, show you around. You're going to see some demolitions, some renovations. If you're interested in seeing that, subscribe.
So thank you for watching, and see you in our next videos. Bye.
Bye. Intuit. Maria termina. Worked a lot.
Ah, okay. And you couldn't say it without looking down 5 times?
No.
Try again.
But before we accepted them, our
parents were not siblings. God.
our parents